My name is Shelley Maestrin. I am the chair of the Reston Historic Trust and Museum. We're so happy to have all of you here this evening. We have a great program for you. I'm actually going to just now introduce Christina Alcorn, who is one of our illustrious board members, who's going to introduce our speaker tonight. And you might notice that she has some crutches and her leg in a boot. And I have to tell you, in keeping with the theme of the evening, she has climbed the highest mountain. She's kicked the final field goal. She went the extra mile. She ran interference. But all of that's really not true. She actually fell on her way to take out the recyclables. There you go. You're on.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad you could come tonight. As Shelley said, I'm Christina Alcorn. I'm a member of the Reston Historic Trust, and we're the organization that's bringing you this presentation tonight. Quick note about who we are and what we do. The Reston Historic Trust is a community organization that seeks to preserve the past, inform the present, and influence the future through educational programs like this one. And the Trust supports and manages the Reston Museum, located at Lake Union Plaza. As a nonprofit organization, we depend on donations and membership from the community. So we have a membership table right outside. I think Kurt might be back there. So after the program, if you haven't already, I know you're new members tonight, stop by the table and consider signing up for a membership. We also have a drive going on right now. Is everybody familiar with the icons, the pharmacy icons at Lake Ann? If you're not, I think most people are. These were icons that were put up when the pharmacy was went into that spot, I think in like 66, 65, Chuck would know. And they've been there, they have been there since then, and they're really beloved by the community. It came down because there's new tenants there, cycling studios going in. So the trust rescued them. And they're in storage right now, but we are going to restore them and put them back up in the breezeway that's between Sing Tai and Small Change, right there. So we're raising money so that we can do that restoration. So we have a GoFundMe page that's up, and you can find that on our website. And we also have some sponsorships available. All that information is back at the table, right up there. Oh, Kurt's got some information there. So we traditionally hold our programs at the Reston Community Center, Lake Ann. I know a lot of you have been to that one. It's the first time we've done it here at the Y. We really appreciate the opportunity to come here. It's been an inaugural event in the community room. Thank you, Q Taylor, for helping organize and having us here tonight. It was kind of a confluence of events that brought us here because this was brand new. It was an opportunity. It was the opening, the grand opening of it. And we wanted to talk about sports. And I didn't know this, but did you know that there are 3 sports that were invented here at the Y? I bet you knows what they are.
Yeah.
Bill, do you know?
Racquetball, basketball, no, I'm sure.
It involves a ball.
Pickleball?
It could be pickleball. It's volleyball.
Volleyball. Do the first 2.
Yep. So,
Dr. James Naismith, 1892.
yeah. So, on behalf of the Trust, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, The History of Reston Sports, Pioneers, Players, and Playing Fields. Our speaker tonight, a Reston resident since 1985.
Anyway.
Oh, there we go. Okay. He calls himself a serial community volunteer. And I think that's a great title for him because he's served on numerous boards, too many to mention, but I'm going to list a few. The RCC, Wolf Trap, Reston Hospital, YMCA, Reston Youth Baseball and Little League, Public Art Reston, founding member, Friends of Reston, Leadership Fairfax, Fairfax County Park Authority. I think of it as if it advances Bob's motto of live, play, work, Bill is involved. And his personal sports background is equally impressive. So you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong. Oh, hold on.
It's on you.
Okay. high school coach and athletic director, slow pitch softball player, 3 world championships, 3-time all-world player, inductee in the Michigan Softball Hall of Fame, top 5 players of all time in the city of Detroit, Little League coach, basketball coach, and then in parentheses, Magic Johnson. Did you coach him?
I did.
Okay.
Wow.
5-time national racquetball champion, current senior mixed doubles and men's doubles champion, and a technical consultant for the U.S. Olympic Committee in Atlanta, Sydney, Salt Lake City, and Athens. So without further ado, I bring you Bouie.
I'm sorry. Lots of familiar faces. Thanks for taking the time to come out this evening. Let me tell you a story, a little bit about this first picture that's up there. There's a lot of baseball equipment in this picture, and we have a friend of mine. This organization I belong to called the No Bats Baseball Club. We get together, we play pickup baseball once a year in a major league ballpark. We just got back from Cincinnati about 4 weeks ago playing at the Great American Ballpark. But anyway, this organization does all sorts of good things. We ran into some people that wanted to organize baseball in India, of all places, but they didn't have any equipment. So we found a guy that we knew that was in the shipping industry, and he says, I tell you what, he says, if you can get the equipment, he says, I'll ship it and I'll make sure that it gets to Mumbai for your guys to get there and go teach baseball. So this was actually a donation, the beginning of a donation from Reston Youth Baseball. And we filled up that entire truck with surplus equipment that we had at the time and shipped it to India. And it was really funny because there was an article that came out. Please turn off all your phones. There was an article that came out about sports in India, and I have no idea how the heck it happened, but it came out that I invented baseball in India. That was part of the article. So that's one of my claims to fame. All right, so Bob Simon had a great vision of what he wanted. He wanted to live here and work here and play here. And, you know, we really took to the leisure time activity. And I remember coming to Reston for the first time on a corporate transfer many years ago, and just driving through before we even found a home, I said, wow, this is like the biggest park I've ever been in coming from the city of Detroit. I mean, all these trees and trails and lakes and everything. And so when we saw that, we decided very definitely this is the place we wanted to live. So, you know, one of Bob's major goals was to make sure that we had full use of leisure time over and over and over again. He talked about community and how that brings people together. And that's really the whole concept of what sports was all about in Reston. Once people started going to gathering spots and parks and trails and lakes, it was all good. So Bob kind of started all of this. And if you look at some of the older pictures, I think Mark Robinson is in that volleyball picture, maybe Phil too, on the top left-hand side. But that's how it kind of all got started. People started gathering in spots around Reston in its early days. They didn't have colored film back then. And on one of the golf courses, but all of these pictures were taken probably in the late 60s, early mid-70s is when it got started. Very early before some of the major organizations. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm going to talk about some of the major organizations that go way back. There are some that I'm going to miss, unfortunately. Some of the newer sports, like I'm not going to talk about the Reston Marathon because that's young in terms of everything else, but certainly we want to talk about things like Reston Youth Athletic Association and all those kinds of things. This was a picture out of the Reston Times back in 1979, and this was actually some kids playing, I don't know where they were playing, but playing baseball was being filmed. And this was a year before Reston Little League, Reston Youth Baseball was created. So they were very interested, kids are starting to grow up a little bit, and we love it. Talking about that Reston Youth Athletic Association. So once I got here, RYAA had pretty much gone away back in '84. There was RYA and RYB and RYS and all those other things, but this had gone away. But originally, the Reston Youth Athletic Association was the overall umbrella organization for all kids' sports in Reston. So whether you wanted to play basketball or swim or play baseball, softball, soccer, you signed up through RYA. And of course, it was all manual at the time. This was even prior to the community center. So you had to go out and find your forms and form your teams and all of that. So this was the very, very beginning. This was the first athletic organization, official athletic organization in Reston. Here's a picture, leisure sports. We recreate. Being the chairman of the park authority now, I've learned that we recreate in different ways because of our diversity. So certainly trails are a big, big deal for us. We had 19 million visitors to our trails last year. We've got almost 700 miles of trails in the county, but a lot of that is right here in Reston. We've got a lot of trails in Reston. And overall, in our needs assessment from the entire county, if you look at what people love the most about living in this area and Reston in particular, trails was #1, far and away before anything else. Ball fields, whether it be baseball, softball, soccer, whatever, on that list of things was 24. In terms, that would really surprise you. And overall in the county, like I said, we have 19 million visitors that use, or citizens and visitors that use our trails. We have 250,000 that use our athletic fields, but they're the loudest group. So that's why they get so much, is because they speak louder and they're really organized. The picture on the right, that's actually, I've got a video of this. This is a picture of the All-Star game up in Barron Cameron Park. One of these, I think this was like 85 or 86 after I'd moved here. And this was an All-Star game, and back then, Reston Adult Softball, Channel 26, used to televise special games. So I've actually got multiple DVDs of Reston softball, slow pitch, all-star games over at Barron Camp. Yeah. Now when those fields went in, if you remember, I live at Freetown Drive, which is right by Bordeaux Field at Reston Parkway and Glade. The lights back then were so bad that I could damn near see Barron Cameron Park from my house. That's how much the glow was over Reston. It just looked like a big orange glow. Wherever you went in Reston, you could see those lights. So needless to say, there may have been an issue from that point on trying to put lights in anything. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Here's a list of pioneers. I've only got 20, and one of the people, a couple people on this list that are not on this list are here tonight, and I want to talk about them a little bit. So, Vicki Winger, raise your hand, Vicki. Vicki was running RA at the time and playing volleyball and soccer and basketball and all of that, and had a lot to do with what the initial infrastructure that went in and provided by Reston Association was provided by Vicki and her planning and her team. So she's got a lot to be proud of there, and is still a big time supporter and currently sits on the RCC board. I've got a couple of cohorts in crime here tonight. Rick Crump and Mark Robinson and Bill Keith back there, 3. And we all kind of started together back in @85, coaching our kids. All of our kids are about the same age. And for about a dozen years, you could find us in a gym, at a pool, at a ball field, and they had a lot to do. Rick was the player agent for me for baseball, and he was also the player agent for basketball, and that all the kids would go out, you do the selections, and then Rick would put together the teams. Mark was the basketball coach because Mark's brother, Les, was the head coach at North Carolina State, among other Division I schools. And so what Rick would do is Rick would get all the kids, we'd make sure our kids were on the team, and then anybody else's name in the pool that we couldn't pronounce, those are the kids we got as well. So Rick made all of that stuff happen. Well, let me go through a few of these. So Jim Horsfield. Jim Horsfield was one of the original founders of Reston Little League, and he was the player agent, the president for a while. He got things going, and by the time I stepped in about '87, he got out. Frank Fannin, who's still around, and Frank must be 90 years old by now. But Frank ran all of the adult programs. So when Reston Youth Baseball was created back in 1971, Reston became the only place within Northern Virginia that you could play baseball, softball, from 5 until 22, regardless of skill level. So there was a skill for everybody to play. So we had T-ball, Little League, Babe Ruth, Senior Babe Ruth, Clark Griffin, and American Legion. So regardless of the skill, and then girls softball. And girls softball encompassed all of that. But girls softball wasn't nearly as big then as it is today because of scholarships and Title IX and all that kind of stuff. Mike Pobat really put Reston Little League on the map. He got together and we started to do a lot of field upgrades, building backstops, building fields, and it had a real community angle because we used to have a field day the first Saturday before the season started. And after field day, everybody would get on buses. This was all organized, and every team had to pick up a litter somewhere in Reston. Every team was assigned, and we had almost 1,000 kids, so that was a lot. And the little kids planted saplings somewhere. So all the T-ballers would go out, and we'd work with Vicky and RA, and they'd plant saplings. So a lot of big trees in Reston were planted by some T-baller a long, long time ago in various parts of Reston, if you will. And then we would all go, Frank, I can't remember Frank's last name, but the owner at that time of Piccadilly used to feed the entire 1,000 people. And he did it as a labor of love, and it was really, really good. John Pinkman, I don't know how quite to describe John Pinkman, but a lot of people describe him as Mr. Baseball. So in the early days, John I don't think played baseball a whole lot. His kids played and were really, really good. But John never saw an opportunity that he didn't turn down. So as a Little League coach, I remember him saying, among all of the T-ball coaches and all of that, you never want to be just a dad with a bag. You got to know what you're doing. You need instruction. You need to learn how to coach. You need to take this stuff seriously. So in order to facilitate that, John did a series on how to teach and how to play baseball on videotape. And he did a series every week, and this again was also televised on Channel 26. How to play baseball. It would run over and over again. If you go to the Reston Library today, you can pick up a Betamax or a VHS tape of the series because he donated them to the Reston Library. So you can still go over there and watch it. Don Bellardo was our quartermaster. He was responsible, he was a military guy. He was responsible for making sure every team got equipped. Every team got equipped with their uniform, with their equipment, bats, balls, catcher's gear. He put out the RFP every year. And Ed Hurley was his sidekick. And Ed's still around. Probably the most famous thing that Ed is famous for, Ed and I at the time were famous for, was many, many years ago when Brown's Chapel was built. We started playing baseball at Brown's Chapel. There was a huge sign. I don't know how many people have been up here, but there was a huge sign that in the middle of the night, Ed Hurley and I put up, probably back in 1987, that said, "Future home of lit ball fields." And that sign was up there forever. And this was before the homes were built right there on Lake Newport. So that was a whole big contentious thing. You can't like these fields. What do you mean we can't like these fields? These fields were meant to be lit. Can't you read the sign? So we went on and on and on with that. But Dom and Ed's kids went off. Dom's kid is an Air Force pilot. Ed had one of his kids tragically died earlier in the 2000s from the flesh-eating disease. It was really sad. But after all of this was over, and these guys well into their 60s, they went back and started coaching again. And started coaching from T-ball with their grandkids. And just finished that cycle 2 years ago. So they were really kind of cool. Craig Gardner was a carpenter. If you go up to Fred Crabtree Park, Fox Mill District Park, he's the guy that built all of those concession stands. They're all different now, but the announcing stands, all of that. Jeff Thomas was the very first guy to grow up in Reston, all the way through and become president of Reston Little League, and actually ran it until he kind of got tired. Bruce Hall was everything. Bruce Hall was a one-man band. He was a ticket reseller, and StubHub basically put him out of business because if you ever wanted tickets for the Redskins, if you didn't get them from the Redskins, you couldn't call Ticketmaster. You had to call Bruce Hall. And so you go to Bruce's house, and Bruce would have thousands of tickets. What game do you want? And Bruce made that livelihood until the invention of the internet. And then he stayed involved in it for a long, long time. The biggest event that used to happen in Reston prior to the building of the town center was the Reston Baseball Carnival that everybody used to think. It was in the parking lot of the Sheraton. It would last 2.5 to 3 weeks. And everybody in the community would be involved. And we had the carnies that would come in, and I can still see the pictures of some of those people. That was prior to drug testing or anything else. They had this woman that counted the money that looked like a jack-o'-lantern. And we would everything was in cash. And so we would take it and take all the money in, and I would sit down with another member of baseball, and she would count the money, and then we would get our share. And she'd hand it to us in a paper bag. So some nights it was so crazy, I'm walking out of there with a police escort, and I've got all this money in this paper bag, and I had to keep it at my house. I thought somebody was going to break into my house because they knew I had this money because you had to deposit it the next day. So it was wild. But we made $35,000 clear on the baseball carnival, and that was really, really cool. That was until Paul Foley came in. Paul Foley said, "You know what? There's this new thing called a bat-a-thon." And he said, we did it over in Herndon. There was a guy in Herndon, John Banco, and we did it over in Herndon, and he said, we made $70,000 in a day. I says, there's no way. He says, yeah. He said, let's try it. So I said, okay. We had a board meeting, and we said, okay, we're going to give this Badathon thing a try. Well, the first year we did it, and the attraction was every kid had to participate, but the teams that won got to sit in box seats at the Orioles game. We took them up on a bus, we fed them, the whole shooting match. Everybody participated. T-ball up through Babe Ruth. First year out of the box, we made $110,000. $110,000. Bye-bye Carnival. Because I can't tell you how many thousands of hours we spent on the Carnival, and for all of that, we could do 3 times that in one night. So that kind of changed the whole fundraising horizon of Reston sports overall. And so we got some guys that know how to make money. A man of all seasons, Jim Elder, Mr. Tennis, Mr. Everything, Mr. Basketball referee. I know Phil knows him from tennis. We know him more from basketball than anything else. And he was kind of like the sole board member of Reston basketball. We would always ask him if he needed help, and we'd say, when are the elections, Jim? And we could never get an answer on when the elections were, but it ran efficiently. And as far as we know, Jim was a board of one, but it worked really, really well. And they did some really, really great things. And Jim stayed involved, organizing it and refereeing, organizing all the referees until I think it was 2013. And then he gave it up. And the guy that started with us, John Schmidt, started way back then. John Schmidt runs it still today. And as we were talking about earlier, our kids are 35 years old. So John's been doing this a really, really long time, and should be commended for it. We haven't talked a whole lot about girls, but Jim Collins was in charge of Reston softball, the girls softball program. And Jim fought for the inequality of fields and conditions and uniforms and everything else for the girls. And eventually raised so much hell with the county that the very first baseball, softball complex that was built because of Jim over at Wakefield Park. There's a softball tournament complex over there just for the girls, and that was actually the first tournament complex, and it was all because of Jim Collins fighting for women. And he's still doing that today. Every time I see him, he says, are we going to get this improvement? Are we going to get that improvement? We're getting another. Pat O'Connor was one of the founders of Reston Soccer. Pat started the first tournament in Reston that ended up to be about 300 teams and stayed involved for a long, long time until his kids got older and went off to college to play. Jay Cobbs and Jeremy Lee, interesting guys. They are now part of Reston Youth Association, which is football. And they are funny guys. They take these little kids, and for the most part, they're minority kids that, over around Southgate where they are, and they put them in cars and they take them to fields. And I can't remember, they knew us on the park authority board, and they said, look, can't you get us fields? We can't get any respect. Nobody will give us a place to play. They used to go to fields, and then they would find a place where they could park their cars, and they would turn their car lights on in order to practice. That's how they practiced. That's how tough they were. So when we started doing synthetic turf fields and all those kinds of things, we had to make sure that they got some of the first spots for the new fields with lights. And these two guys are still involved today. The football program is dropping like a rock across the county. We saw a 30% drop last year in registrations mostly due to all the conversation around CT and brain injuries. But those guys are good. Mary Conaway was the gym elder on the women's side of tennis. And I think Mary now is an administrator with USTA and runs a program at one of the largest USTA facilities down in Florida. Really, really well. But she did a lot to advance tennis here in Reston. Anything you want to add to that? Because you worked with her quite a bit.
No, she really upped the whole level. Of
She did.
tennis and-
She did. Karen Penso. Anybody here know Karen Penso besides you three back there? Karen Penso, young woman who very, very active in putting together women's basketball, girls basketball. She was at the forefront. She had played a little bit, but she was a referee. And really, when you look at folks like Karen and Jim Collins, they were way, way out in front before Title IX in terms of supporting women and their leisurely activities, which is really good. I don't have to tell you about Wendell Berg, Hall of Famer. He said hello. I communicated with him today. I did not know until today that he had moved down to Wilmington, North Carolina. So I hooked him up with a golf course that a business partner of mine owns. So he'll be good. But Wendell Berg put Reston on the map in terms of high school basketball. He was the guy, the producer of great, great talent, and we'll get into some of those later on. Ella and Dennis Lee were a couple that ran kids back and forth, had 1,000 kids, ran them back and forth, but they were both really, really, again, strong in women's activities because their two oldest were two girls, and very, very involved in getting the softball program started at South Lakes. They were the original coaches and organizers, and built the field, built the softball field over behind the big baseball field at South Lakes and got lights on that field. So they did a great job. Dave Morgan, absolutely great. He was the first athletic director at South Lakes, and spent a lot of years developing that complex that we continue to expand upon today. Dave retired a couple of years ago, but we had a lot to be thankful for. And then Lila Gordon, who is the executive director of the community center. Lila was our treasurer, so I used to take a lot of this cash. This was before she was the director, and I would drop it off at the community center and say, "You deal with it. You get it deposited in the bank and all of that." Funny story. She had her son, and he was on a t-ball team. And she didn't get along with the coach. And so she called me up and she said, "I want to register a complaint about the coach." Well, we used to have the board meetings in my basement. So I said, "Well, if you got a bitch, come to the board meeting and tell the board." And she did. And she came in and said, and I said, "Well, if you want to do something about it, you should get involved." And truer words have never been spoken. She jumped in as the treasurer. And then we started doing all of the RYB registrations were typically the last 3 Saturdays in February at the community center. It was all walking. And that's actually how I got involved. I was taking my son swimming, and Mike Pobat says, "You want to sign that kid up for baseball?" I said, "No, I want to take him swimming." And he caught me on the way out. And he said, "Okay." I said, okay, I'll sign him up. And that led from T-ball coach to T-ball commissioner, and the rest is history. Never say yes. Okay, so RYB, we talked a little bit about this. RYB pretty much is no longer in existence. There's no umbrella organization anymore, but Reston Youth Baseball was started in 1971 by a group of really, really good guys. Again, it was an umbrella organization that provides support for everybody that wanted to play baseball or softball from 5 until 22 years of age. And at its peak, we had about 1,500 kids in the spring program, which was a lot. We probably had more kids. When my first year as a T-ball commissioner, we had 22 T-ball teams with 14 kids per team. So that's a lot of kids, that's a lot of organizing. And we actually had 2 leagues, we had 2 major leagues with 8 teams in each major league. So there were a lot of kids playing baseball years and years ago. We primarily played at the RA fields, and the famous fields where kids wanted to get to as they moved up the channel: Bordeaux, Ring Road, Hook Road, Browns Chapel, Running Cedar, which Mark just loves because the RA trucks run in his backyard down the trail, and he screams at him all the time about that. But Running Cedar down there, and Twin Branches, which was the most dangerous field ever. Twin Branches is at the Fox Mill, at Lawyers and Twin Branches, and there's no parking there, but you would have T-ball games there with 30 cars, and kids running all over the place, and people whizzing around that corner. So I'm glad that we pretty much finally eliminated that. We later added fields with the Park Authority at Crabtree, which was Fox Mill, Reston North, South Lakes Drive, which was for the girls, and was one of the first ADA Title IX fields in the county, and then Stratton Fields. Crazy, crazy picture. What happened? Did I hit something? There it is. Okay. All right. So these are a couple of pictures. The one in particular is the one right here. This is opening day, the second year that the town center was open. So the story about that was we had an older gentleman that was our sponsorship coordinator. Dick Podol was his name. And he would use a pencil about this big to write